Hello and welcome to the Smart Divorce Podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Graham Bowcock, who I've known for a little while now. I think it must be at least 10 years, mustn't it, Graham?
Could be, yes, yeah.
So Graham is a chartered surveyor and registered valuer. He regularly acts as an expert in matrimonial property valuations, which is what we're going to talk about today. Graham's been practicing in the Northwest region for over 30 years. Crikey. I think we might have aged you there, Graham.
No, it really is that long.
Crikey. I'm not even adding up anymore. I've stopped. I think I'm going to start counting backwards. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So we're going to talk today about valuing property in matrimonial divorce and civil partnership dissolution. And I know you work not just on the family home, but quite often it could be an investment portfolio of different properties as well. Is there a particular type of property that suggests we should bring you in rather than using a different type of an estate agent, for example?
We cover a range of property types within the business, myself and my colleagues. We tend to get them where they are perhaps a little bit more complex. In terms of using an estate agent, it's a slightly different discipline. What an estate agent does, the first thing I have to say, that it's not binding on court. So what we do is an expert report, usually is what's called a single joint expert, an SJE, where we're acting between the parties, but our duties to the court. An estate agent doesn't have that level of liability. Now, if the parties have just a matrimonial home and it is perhaps a modern house on an estate, there's similar houses being traded, and they're happy to get a couple of estate agents in and agree things between themselves, that's fine. There's nothing to stop them doing that at all. So that might be for many a cost-effective way of doing it, perfectly amicable, if they're all happy with it. Where we come in is where the property is perhaps a bit more complex. Perhaps there might be issues with leases or planning. And the other issue that we've seen, certainly since the end of lockdown, June 2020, is values certainly in this area have risen massively. So if you take the average value of a property, generally is about £260,000. In our area, it will be slightly higher. So a 10% increase, you'll see, could be best part of £30,000, 20%, £60,000. So suddenly there's more at stake and more driver for the parties to get it right, if that's the correct phraseology for it. There's more to challenge.
Okay, so let's go backwards a little bit into some of the things that you've just talked about. So you've talked about a single joint expert. Can you just explain a little bit more about what that is and about how you as an expert would be instructed?
Well, the single joint expert, what it means is I would be the only expert in the matter and the only valuer in the matter. And the appointment, the first contact usually comes from the local solicitors. Sometimes parties directly if they're a litigant in person, not represented. But generally it's solicitors that would contact us and check on our fees and ability, and they ask for a CV. We keep a professional CV to hand, and we have a formal process for quoting the fees. And we're often mentioned in the court order. So it would be, it's a personal appointment. So it's not my firm. My colleagues get appointments in their names. So we put forward whoever's most appropriate for the particular property type and availability and so on. And the court order then says Mr. Bowcock is to be the single joint expert in this matter. So that's the how we get the instructions. Occasionally, we might act as an expert for one party, perhaps if the parties can't agree on a single joint expert, because there is a fundamental requirement that the appointment is agreed. But sometimes it can't be agreed and we represent one party only. But it doesn't matter that, because our duty is always to the court. As an expert, our duty isn't to whoever pays us or to the individual that appoints us. Our duty is entirely to the court, and to make sure that, to help the court essentially come up with to assist in the distribution of the assets.
Okay, so single joint expert, generally you're appointed by both sides, so both lawyers. Even if you're only approached in the first place by one of them, you would be appointed by both lawyers, or a lawyer and the other party if they were a litigant in person, which is where you're acting for yourself and you don't have a lawyer. Have I got that right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. And generally this happens once there's already if there's a court process in the midst. So for example, we've been through a first appointment and a judge has said you need to go off and get an expert in this area. Is that right?
That's right, yes, yeah.
Okay. So do you ever get instructed by the two parties where there's no court process, where it's a mediation process, for example, or the lawyers are negotiating between themselves?
Yes, yep, absolutely, and we can do that. And we can draft it a report as an expert valuer. We can write it however the parties instruct us, to be perfectly honest. Yeah. But the duty change, if we're not under a court order, then the duty may change, but we would still professionally be acting as if the parties have come to us jointly, we'd be acting on exactly the same basis as though it's something called FPR 25. You might be familiar with it. The family procedure rules, or if it's it's the same as CPR 35, civil procedure rules, which is non-matrimonial if we're doing a partnership dissolution, business distribution, then it's the same principle. Yeah. So we would treat it the same whether or not there's actually a court order, because sometimes people come to us in the early stages just to try and help themselves sort things out quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm thinking of clients that I work with or have worked with, and generally they go down the route of, at that stage, estate agents usually. And I know you mentioned before that if there are complexities, and you mentioned leases and also planning, what impact do those particular things have on valuing a property? And are there any other complexities that you can think of where a couple might be better off coming to yourself rather than getting estate agents to do a valuation of the property?
Well, what an estate agent does is a marketing appraisal. So what you will get back, and you've probably seen them many times, is a letter. So letter, dear Mr. and Mrs. Smith, if we were going to sell your house, we'd be asking for £300,000, and it's as simple as that. Our duty, as chartered surveyors, registered valuers, and the duty to the court is more rigorous. So we'd interrogate the property a little bit more, not a building survey by any stretch of the imagination. So we're not too interested in the structure, the pathology of the building, but as you say, leases and planning. So if there's an extension built with no planning consent, for example, that would give rise to us considering how to treat the value. It may impact on the value, it may not, and that's something we consider. And leases, if the family have an investment portfolio, are the leases robust? What do they mean? What's the impact on the value, again, by the fact that these leases are in place? If it's a well-structured investment portfolio, a good lease should be adding value. But we do see them where they're poorly drafted. They don't do quite what the parties intended. And at this point, they start thinking, all right, the value is compromised because they're not actually very good. Rent review provisions, good lease should have rent reviews, should have repairing obligations clearly set out, ideally with the landlord doing as little as possible, the insurance being, all these sort of things. But if they don't have the correct documentation in place, then that could impact on the value of the property. The other thing that comes up quite often is access rights. For example, we deal with a lot of farms and rural property, and access is often an issue. People haven't thought about this. Well, I've always used that access, but actually it might not be their access, or it might limit development of the land in the future. So it's very much a paper trail to make sure everything is in order with those properties, and that the value is assessed correctly based on the facts of what we can find out.
Yeah, you mentioned rural properties and farms are quite often the types of properties that you might value at. I guess if it's a kind of one-off, that there aren't very similar properties in the area, that makes the estate agent less useful, and someone like yourself more useful if there's not good comparable evidence. So would that be right?
Yeah, I mean, we have our reports that we do here at Oakwood, they include the comparables. So we will state what evidence we've looked at. I mean, and in fact, we're quite detailed, and we write a methodology as to how we've assessed them. And you know, in some places it can be a challenge to find good evidence, because we're looking at two things. One is geographically close, and two is time close. So something sold 20 years ago isn't going to be very helpful to us assessing value today. Something that sold 6 months ago would be. But sometimes we do have to go back a little bit longer in time and a little bit wider geographically. Then it becomes the job of the expert to take that evidence and work out what does it mean. And at the very least, it will give us a tone of the market. You know, are all the, you know, is land selling, to give you an example, at £15,000 an acre or £20,000 an acre, or £5,000 an acre? So it would give us a tone of the market, and we can see what other stuff is happening at the time. But then the expert has to rely on their experience, and we have to be careful about accepting things where we're not an expert. And I always have this the barristers or the judge on my shoulders when I'm doing a job. You know, it can be quite nerve-wracking. You know, why did you say that? Why did you? What does it mean? What are the implications of it? Which you know, challenges me. Quite happy to be challenged in that way, but it does. But when I'm reaching a conclusion, I'm always thinking, well, is it right? You know, and I have to swear a statement. That's part of the FPR 25 rules. I'm swearing to say that I believe everything I've written in my report is correct. Now, ultimately, there is some subjectivity in valuation because two people may have a different view, but depending on the type of property, depends, and there is case law on percentage sort of tolerance. So if you're looking at terraced houses in an area where there's thousands of terraced houses, you should be pretty close, you know, within 5%, I think is the case law. But that could be expanded for something that's a little bit more unusual. I hate to use the word unique, because every property is unique in some way or other. If only by the fact that it's two doors down from another one. But yeah, we have to make that assessment, and say there are tolerances as to what how accurate we should be. But it would depend on the type of property. You know, if it was something like a cinema, for example, very unusual. They don't get traded very often. But if a family happened to own one, you know, your tolerance of value would be different than if it's the say the semi-detached house on an estate of modern semi-detached houses.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What happens if the, I guess it won't be the lawyers, but what happens if the clients, the family, disagree with your viewpoint on the value of their property? Do they have any comeback?
Yeah, well, it does happen, of course, because they quite simply because we are dealing with people's money and their livelihood. So for whatever reason, people may think that we are wrong, or misinformed, misjudged, whatever word. Some are more robust in their sort of views than others. But what happens is when we submit a report, as I say, we try and be as robust as possible in the evidence, the methodology. But the parties, when they get the report, they can then submit to me supplementary questions. And usually in the order, there's a time frame for submission, 10, 14 days after the report delivery, and I have a period then to respond, again, 10 or 14 days. And within those timeframes, they within those questions, rather, they can submit to me other evidence. It may be that there's something wrong with the property. You know, maybe something was missed, or you know, not inspected, or again, back to the paperwork, perhaps there's something come to light in terms of leases or planning that wasn't made available to me earlier. So the supplementary questions deals with all that. Because bear in mind, the parties often have far better knowledge of the properties than I do. And also, if we're dealing with a portfolio, there could be quite a lot to actually get through. And they may say, oh, well actually, you weren't aware of this, or we need to make you aware. But that can include value. So maybe they've got evidence of other property that's been sold that we haven't. You know, we have various databases, but we've not. We don't have access to absolutely every sale that's ever occurred. So it may be that they have some idea of other property. Or maybe they're just considering something in a different way. Well, if you think about this, you know, have you really made allowance for the fact that it's got parking, or it's got a pylon in the back garden, or these sort of things? And our duty remains to the court, and we will look at what the parties say. And we're happy to do that. And I think it is fair to say that as an expert, the one thing we would never do is disregard what the parties say, because as I say, it's somebody's livelihood. It's fundamentally important, and we shouldn't be scared of changing our minds if something important comes to light. So I don't hold myself out to be the expert who's stuck on a point of view. That point of view can be flexible, provided I always have good reason, because my duty remains to the court. So just because one party says that they think the value is overstated by £10,000 doesn't mean I agree with them or would change my report. But if they put something to me that perhaps I wasn't aware of before, then I am A, duty bound to look at it, and B, morally would look at it. And then I issue a formal response to supplementary questions. And there's a supplementary response. It references the report that I've done, and it says, I was then asked by party A these questions. And sometimes the parties actually agree the questions between themselves, or sometimes they come from just one party. But I would, in my supplementary report, I would say, this is what I was asked, and this is my response to those questions. And that may or may not alter the values that I report. But as long as I'm always honest, that's my fundamental obligation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that supplementary report presumably goes to both parties.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, in terms of, as I say, sometimes the two parties would agree the questions and offer to pay for them jointly, 50% each. More often than not, the questions come from one party, and the party then pays for those questions. But all correspondence has to be between both parties. There should never be correspondence. And to be honest, sometimes when we're dealing with litigants in person, that's one of the niceties of the process that they either aren't aware of, or they disregard. And we get emails written just to me. Everything we have is seen by both parties. So there's never anything which is hidden from them. We would never do that. And if a party, if you, for example, wrote to me privately on behalf of a party, which I'm sure you never would, I would immediately send it to the other side as well, so that they've got a full record, because we should always avoid conflict and things being said, did you say that? Well, if it's absolutely clear in correspondence, then there's nothing hidden.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're going out to see a property, to value a property, what do you need to see when you get there?
As much as possible, or absolutely everything. And I mean, in terms of the inspection, we do what the parties want in terms of their arrangements. I've done everything where sometimes I pick up the keys from a solicitor and I don't meet the people at all. Other times when they both want to be there and they follow me around very closely to make sure, pointing out, damaged windows or dampness in the hallway, that sort of thing. Or sometimes they're more relaxed and they're just happy if there's one party living in the property, for example, or one of them manages the investments that they have, then that party just meets me and shows me around. And so I get everything from, say, from nobody to everybody to one of them in the middle. But in terms of what we look for, yeah, we do like to see everything. We have to go in the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the box rooms, the outbuildings. It should be thorough. There's no doubt about it. I usually have an associate with me who accompanies me, partly because two eyes are better than one. Or better,
four eyes are better
four
than
eyes
two.
are better than two. Two eyes are better probably than one, though. Two sets of eyes, because then we can chat about it afterwards to make sure we've covered everything. But also, we do get cases where parties will how do I phrase it? We'll try and engage us in a discussion about the property or about values. And but we have no interest. We have no interest in the divorce or the separation itself. That is of no interest what party A has done to party B, or hasn't done, or should have done, might have done. So we have no interest in that. Our interest is purely in the property, but also in the property as we see it on the day. So the fact that they bought it in 1950 and they've done all this work to it and spent all this money is irrelevant. All we want, has it got double glazed windows or not? Has it got a nice kitchen or not? Has it got central heating or not? So we're dealing very much in the facts. So when we're looking at the property, we actually have very little engagement with the parties. Something I find difficult because I do like talking to people, but I have to switch off. And we are very practical. Has it got, where is the boiler? Has it got a modern boiler? Has it got a modern consumer unit? And questions like that, which all the things which A, we have to see and report, but B, they're the things that give rise to value. So the inspection is, I won't say it's frosty, but it's managed professionally to make sure we're not chatting away to people and so on.
Okay. And when you say you need to see absolutely everything and go absolutely everywhere, are you going up in the loft? Have you got ladders? Are you looking at the roof? How far does everything go?
No, we don't do lofts. Interestingly, I mean, if there was easy access, then we might, but we don't. We're not obliged to actually, and that's actually come out of mortgage valuations as well. That we don't have to go up in the loft. In terms of the building, we're looking at general condition. So the roof, we would view it from ground level. Can be difficult if it's a flat roof, but if it's a standard pitched roof of slate or tiles, we will be commenting from ground level. So in terms of repair, our valuation is our inspection is relatively superficial. We're not onto the detail of the pathology that something needs an absolute re-roof for X pounds. We're just looking at, if somebody was coming to buy that house today, how much would they pay for it? And in fact, it is something that sometimes comes out in the supplementary questions, that there may be sort of more significant repairs, and there's a quote lying on a file somewhere to repair the roof for £20,000. And how's that to be factored in? And we wouldn't factor it in initially, but we might factor it in, do supplementary questions if it's a valid concern, because we could only have a look at it from a valuation point of view, which is a ground level stood on the we don't move carpets, we don't move furniture or anything like that. It's not a pathological building survey.
What about, we talked about farms before. If somebody does have land as such with the property that they own. Do you walk the entire stretch of land? Are you measuring it? How does that work?
Well, we don't measure. We would measure the internal of property, dimensions of a property. We do that with a laser. But land we don't measure. But we have mapping systems in the office, so we would like to see the title plan. So it's a basic requirement that we will either get it. Hopefully it's registered. Not all land is, but the vast majority in the UK is registered. So we would get the title plan, and then we can map it on our system, so we would know whether a field is 2 acres or 1 acre. So we're not measuring it ourselves. How much do we walk? It depends on what we're looking at. If it's a small farm, 5 or 10 acres, then yes, we would walk it. Particularly walking the boundaries, just looking for things that might be unusual or we need to be considered. If it's a larger property, then we might do it by sample. So if it's 1,000 acres, we would not necessarily walk every square inch of it. That would be somewhat uneconomic. But I do have a Land Rover, so we could get to most of it. But we like to see. I mean, the rule of all valuations is that we should see everything, and we should report everything in our field notes, and we should get it down into our report, so there shouldn't be any doubt. If we don't look at something, that could be acceptable, provided we report it. We didn't access this bedroom in the house because it was locked. There was a shed that was locked. We were asked not to go in a particular building for whatever reason. So we come then. That comes down to quality of reporting, really, as to how much we report on what we've seen. But to answer your question, how much you see? Well, it should be. Everything is the ideal, but scale back. Sometimes they might ask us not to look at things. Could you do it on a desktop basis? Particularly if it's a portfolio of a lot of houses that are the same. They may have access with tenants, difficulties gaining access, for example. So they say, well, we could get you into 3 out of 5, but the other 2 we can't get you in there, but they are the same. So we would. It's all about communication, really, Tamsin, just making sure that everybody knows what we're doing and why we're doing it, so that in 12 months' time, when they come to court, they don't believe we looked at a house we didn't, or a property we didn't, because it's clear in the report we didn't look because there was no access.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that makes sense. And then you mentioned a few different types of paperwork that you'd expect to see, so leases and planning and the plan of the property. How does that paperwork get to use that? I'm assuming that's not what you wouldn't inspect that when you go to the property. Is that something that's sent to you with the instruction?
Yes, ideally, and it comes down to quality instructions in the first place. But now planning documents are publicly available, so we can get those, and we try and get as much before we go, so that we're not just turning up and saying, oh yes, so you've got an extension, or you've got a shed, or a new house in the garden that we weren't aware of. So we try and get the planning documents in advance. EPCs, which you don't legally have to have an EPC unless you're going to sell or let the house, but they're a help steering to value because it affects mortgages and so on. But those again are publicly available. Leases are not, unless they're actually registered. So it depends how long they're for. So if it's for more than 7 years, it would be registered at the land registry. So we can download those. If it's a short-term lease, as you get for a house, or maybe just a shop, for 3 years, 5 years, we would ask the parties to send us those documents, again, ideally in advance, just so that we know what we're dealing with. And anything else is relevant. There may be other documents for, access being a common one. They've agreed with the next door neighbour to take access over their land because it helps get around the back of the house and that sort of thing. So just as much as the parties can send us, and we try and coordinate it ideally before we go, but sometimes we're not fully aware till we get there what it is we're looking at, and it's only then by by doing the forensic investigation that we find that there is a problem, or there is some documentation that we need. Bear in mind, not everybody knows what we need until we try and steer people through it, but sometimes actually being out on the ground gives us and the parties a better idea of where we're going and what we do need.
Sure, that makes sense. When you're valuing a property, we talked before about comparable evidence, so geographically and then kind of recent sales. How do you go about collecting that sort of evidence, and is there anything else that you look for to help you to value a property? I'm asking for secrets now, Graham.
Yes, yeah. Well, we actually pay quite a lot of money every month for a database, which records a lot of market activity, particularly commercial property, but it's got quite a wide variety of property. And then it could be as simple as just phoning around the local agents. Because one issue with recorded sales, and particularly, and it's going to be quite a challenge over the next few weeks with what's happening in the market, because evidence, by the time we get it, is historic. Yeah. The best evidence is a recorded sale at the land registry, because there you've got a willing buyer, a willing seller, and usually a willing lender. We're moving into slightly uncharted territory now, because you've got you might still have a willing buyer and seller, but you might not have a willing lender the way the rate products are being pulled. So objectivity is our first aim. So a house that is sold a couple of months ago and reported, that is a fact. That's an absolute matter of fact. The subjectivity then is well, but has the market changed? And it is possible, I won't say likely, but it's possible that the market has changed, because it changes every day, to be frank about it. You know, it's never the same, but we get trends as to whether the market is rising or falling. But at the moment, we've just got this slight difficulty because we are in the unknown. Now, where we are in North Cheshire, we haven't yet seen great evidence of a massive change. There might be a plateauing, and I suspect at some point values may well fall, but the activity still seems to be there. Particularly if you're looking at residential property, demand has been massive and outstripped by supply. The evidence we're getting now from agents is that the supply has just got even tighter. So people that wanted to sell are just not selling. They just hold it. So that's going to stabilize prices. Now that's our area. It'll be different elsewhere. And there'll be places where the values are falling off the cliff. So what the experts should be doing is getting as much intelligence as they can from the local marketplace, the agents that are day in, day out dealing with the buyers, the sellers, the properties, and so on. Oh, sorry, you disappeared. Yeah, with the buyers and sellers, and we should be recording that, and we can rely on that. I mean, hopefully it's consistent. So if you get the eternal optimist and the eternal pessimist, somewhere in the middle there should be the one or two agents telling you how it really is. And it's back to communication. As long as we're recording all this, we can rely on it, because we have to. You know, that's part of the job that we do for all valuations is an assessment of the local market. Obviously, we have our own views on things from the work we're doing day in, day out. You know, when we're valuing, you know, the volume of property we do, you get to trend. You get to see, are the banks coming to us for instructions? Are they still lending money? Are there still buyers on our agency side? And you know, are buyers pulling out, are sellers pulling out, and this sort of thing. So there is an element of subjectivity, but you know, initially we're database driven by actual facts, and you know, we will get land registry titles and so on to find out how much property actually sold for. Not what people think it's sold for, but what it actually sold for. Not the pub talk.
I like that. What, just thinking about market conditions as they are at the moment, and I know it's going to be difficult to make comments on them, but if you were if we were experiencing a falling market in the area that we're in, would that make you value a property on the lower side just to be on the safe side in a falling market, or does that not impact your professional valuation?
I think it'll depend on the property type. To be honest, I mean, as I said, we're guided by the absolute evidence to start with, and then we would. People talk about down valuations. It's a very common phrase in the press. Oh, they down value the property. Well, no, they probably just valued it correctly, and you wanted it to be higher. That's my take on down valuations. So we would hopefully be reflecting, so to sort of turn the question around, we'd hopefully be reflecting where the market is. As I say, normally the trends are more consistent, but I say since the mini budget a couple of weeks ago, it might be reversed today, who knows? But the mini budget has caused instability. But if we were looking, for example, at residential property, again in our area, North Cheshire, it's always a robust market. I've been here 30 years, and it's robust. If we were looking at town centre property, town centre retail, I'd be concerned, because, and have been since COVID, the way the market has changed. Secondary retail actually has survived quite well. Your parades of shops in areas of housing estates because the dynamic of the market has changed, where people they want the convenience store, they want the chip shop, they want the barbers and that sort of thing. But your town centre retail, city centre retail has struggled. Same with offices. City centre offices, more the domain of one of my partners here, but they are struggling in some places. So we're absolutely property by property, and that's where we come in our role as an expert to make sure that we know where the market's going as best we can, in these difficult times. But if we start with the absolute evidence and then move forward to the subjective view as to what appears to be happening to the market and what the feedback is currently.
Fantastic, Graham. We're coming to the end of our time together, I'm afraid. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't? No,
I think that's been a pretty thorough review without making it overcomplicated. It's something we like doing. We myself and colleagues, we enjoy it. We enjoy the exam question type scenario, but equally we're happy. If it's just a straightforward house, we don't mind that. But if it's more complex, then that's challenging for us. And we don't find it difficult to act as experts, because we just understanding the duty is the key thing, and that's where the parties need to understand as well that our duty is not to them, it's to the court. And I think that's got to be the key takeaway from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if any of our listeners need somebody who has your skills to help them with their divorce, how can they contact you? Well,
we're at my firm is Oakwood Property Services. We're undergoing a rebrand. We have been Oakwood Valuation Surveyors, but we're undergoing a rebrand to Oakwood Property Services. But if you Google either of those, you'd find us. We've got a website. We're based here in Altrincham. In terms of the patch we cover, it really depends on the property. It's if it's a larger property, a big farm, for example, we go up into Lancashire or North Wales. But we wouldn't necessarily go to Rill for a terraced house. So it depends on the extent of the property, and we've got a fully manned office here. All our valuers and everyone is employed by the firm. We don't have external consultants doing valuation work. So yeah, just look at Oakwood Property in Altrincham.
Fantastic. Thank you, Graham. And we'll put your contact details in our show notes as well to make sure that people can get hold of you. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you this morning. And thank you for listening or watching. And we will catch you in the next episode.